Starting off with standing items. Any new faces? I think everyone here has been to at least one meeting. Cool. Outstanding project level RFCs. Give me 1 second while I open this up in a window where you can't make fun of the 200 tabs I have open. Okay. Let's share the screen. Okay. I'm going to assume everyone can see that, but holler if you can't. Only thing in outstanding project level RFCs. Consolidate all RFC text into a single location.
Yeah,
I'm
so
assuming this is not actually an RFC.
This is not an RFC. This is just a technical change to like the RFC's repository. The idea generally is that all of the RFC text would appear in a directory just called text, and they would stay there forever, and that their state, whether or not they've been accepted or implemented, would be just a list that's on the README. And like that list could be updated as like the state of the RFC changes. Generally enabling us to do stuff like link to RFCs and not worry about the link breaking.
That makes a ton of sense. I feel like the other way would be to have state sort of as a field in the RFC, but this probably gives people an easier way to look at it at a glance.
I'm happy to do both, but yeah, I like the aggregated list, but I'm also happy to go into all the RFCs and add like a state field. That's fine.
That's bike shedding. I feel like the advantage of having it in a field as well is that when you link to it using that link that isn't broken, you can get a sense of whether you should expect it to work or not. Cool. Allows fast for project level RFCs. Unless should give people a chance. Does anyone else have thoughts about aggregating these or questions? Okay, sounds relatively uncontroversial. Moving on to sub-team specific RFCs. Look like we got a big old nothing. So I'm going to stop sharing. And we can move on to the rest of the agenda here. I put this first bullet point, which is consolidating RFCs. I wanted to float this idea to the team. I feel like right now we keep sub-team specific RFCs in the different Buildpack repos for the top level Buildpacks for the language families. And this gets a little bit weird in Java, where we have 3 top level Buildpacks, Java Native Image, and Java Azure, and some RFCs might apply to just one of those, but some might apply to all of them. And also just as a interested party who wants to keep an eye on RFCs coming from other subteams, I personally find the fact that they're scattered around makes it harder to watch and keep an eye on what's happening. So I was wondering how people thought about maybe moving them all into the RFCs repo, but we can apply labels to them for the different subteams. So it's easy to filter down and still see things that are relevant to you. Anyone have any thoughts about that?
I like this idea.
Okay. Do we need an RFC to make this change, or is this part of the process not documented in an RFC? Do we need like an RFC?
I think currently, I mean, I have to reread the README on RFC's repo, but I think currently it's documented that all RFCs have to be approved by the steering committee, I think we just add some text that says top level project RFCs must be approved by the steering committee, but then like RFCs in these like subdirectories are like approved by maintainers of those like sub teams or whatever. If we just stated that just so it was clear, then like I think that's really the only change that needs to take place.
So would
I don't
everyone
know if
be
that needs to be an
comfortable if
RFC.
I directly opened a PR that we could review about that without opening an RFC for it?
Sounds great.
Okay, great.
One thing I would ask to like get ahead of the maintenance on this is if we can, on some of the Java repos, is there a workflow that checks if PRs have like labels on them? I feel like I maybe saw that. It'd be nice if we could enforce that incoming RFCs be labeled with appropriate subteams from the jump.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. We'll have to have a label that's like top level as well, and we can make sure one of them is applied. But I think that should be pretty straightforward. Cool. I guess with the RFC numbering, maybe we want to have different subdirectories for the different subteams as well, so that we don't have to renumber them.
I think the subdirectories bit also helps with like we could set up code owners that own subdirectories under those things so that they get notified when a PR is opened for something that has an impact on their particular group.
Okay, sounds good. Any other thoughts on that before we move on? Okay, my next agenda item is also very meta. We can just have a meeting about this meeting. But I was curious about the structure of this working group and how to make it more valuable to a larger audience by allowing people to sort of have a better sense about when they should attend based on their specific interests. I guess more specifically, I feel like the fact that we discuss all of the sub-team RFCs in the same meeting can make it hard for someone who's particularly interested in one area to just opt into a time-consuming meeting when they know that their particular area would be discussed, rather than coming to a large working group and, you know, maybe this person is really interested in Node.js and then we end up talking about Go LD flags for 20 minutes and it's not the best use of their time. I think the trade-off there is we have a lot of sub-teams and areas, and I don't want to pollute people's calendars with many meetings, but I do think that maybe they could happen less frequently. So my proposal was going to be that we could have a half-hour version of this meeting that's for the top level RFC. I think we rarely go over that. And then move to sub-team meetings, sub-team working group meetings for the different interest areas, but have them half-hour long, but less frequently than once a week. Do other people feel like that would help them attend the things they're more interested in, or is that just more of a pain because it's less predictable? Any hot takes here?
I would be happy to see something like this. I think that like the vast majority of things that folks care about in a particular RFC that might get discussed during a language specific like meeting could probably be hashed out in the like actual comments of the RFC itself. Which then kind of calls into question the utility of like a particular language family like meeting, other than maybe to surface as a place for folks to engage maintainers and contributors on those teams with questions and support concerns and like, you know, requests for user features and those types of things. So like, I would argue that like having them less frequently wouldn't damage any sort of ongoing conversation about like language specific RFCs, and maybe could open up an opportunity for us to do stuff like language specific office hours for the particular language families, like as another point of engagement with the community.
I like that idea. We just moved one of our working groups in C&B to office hours. We're getting sort of like different types of content there, and it's been really valuable. I feel like it makes it more approachable for people to come with, you know, specific problems they're having rather than like a fully formed proposal.
I'd argue you probably could get away with like once monthly language family meetings that are spaces where stuff like RSCs could be discussed, but like maybe are more focused on like engaging users as like an office hours format.
Sounds good. Do we have a calendar on the community repo for these meetings?
I think all it says is the meeting happens on Tuesdays at this time. Here's a link. So I don't think there's actually like a calendar.
Sounds good. I'll start by opening a PR there, and if people feel like that's too big of a change, we can RFC it. All right.
One slightly other thing about meeting structure, or like how this meeting runs. A little while ago, I think someone else in this meeting kind of asked what the story is with like notes or minutes or a way of discerning what's happened in the meeting without watching it back in real time. And since then, there's been some informal note taking happening on the agenda, but nothing really concrete. I think that having minutes for this meeting that are, you know, short and sweet, informative, could do a lot for increasing the visibility of why you might want to come to this meeting, and also allow people to not come and still keep tabs on what's going on. So I guess I'm proposing maybe an additional role besides facilitation that is note taking that could rotate.
I like that. I would suggest too, maybe if we could try to have the topics for the meeting out in advance of the meeting, that would allow people to see what's going to be discussed and help them decide if they should join.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
I think we can make, no, go ahead, Emily.
I was gonna say that's something we've been pushing for on C&B for a while. I will say that as much as everyone seems to want that, like when the rubber meets the road, very few people go and actually fill out the agenda before the meeting comes and they think about it. So I'd love for us to try to fill out the agenda. But I do have some skepticism that it will happen. Maybe we could put out like a Slack reminder or something.
This was the first week I can remember where there were actually items. There are at the very top of the document, there is this future topics like area. And this is the first week I can remember where there were actually items that were there. So Paketo arm stacks and language family shared libraries were in the like future topics section for the agenda. But you're right, folks don't usually fill those things out until right at the beginning of the meeting. I think we could probably make a pretty quick change to just the standing items, which is like before we start recording, like designate a note taker, just so that that happens.
Let's do it right now.
I was also going to say, I think that if we end up splitting the meeting up into like language family office hour type meetings, that would also help, even if we didn't go the agenda route, just because it would already help people kind of have a general idea of what to expect. Like, are we just going over RFCs, or are we just talking about Ruby and things like that? So that could definitely help.
So it didn't mean for my pessimism to discourage people from filling out the agenda in advance. I feel like we should all try our best.
I mean, if we really wanted it to happen, that the agenda was filled out in advance, we could simply like decide the meeting topics before the meeting and then like not discuss things if they haven't been added to the agenda. Like if we really care that much, that is something that we could do. I don't know if that's how much we care.
Sounds like the kind of thing we want to do for working group, maybe not office hours, where we want it to be more welcoming for people to come with their random problems. But we can be strict. If you don't put it on the agenda before the meeting, too bad, wait for next week.
Yeah, or we could limit the time of like things that aren't on the agenda in advance, you know, just time box it to 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, I like that, a little less extreme, which I think is good, especially to phase into something like that.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Sounds good. All right, done with the meta topics. On to something more fun. Paketo arm stacks.
Yeah, so here's the part where both of the future topics were me, which makes them not a very good sample, I think. I was just curious what the story is with, I guess, arm stacks in C and B more broadly. I've noticed today that there's a channel in the C and B Slack about this, and we've just been getting some questions in the Paketo Slack about whether we would support this. And I, was mostly just curious who, if anyone's working on that, and is that a future direction?
I'm happy to speak to it a little bit. Right now, the C and B life cycle does not support ARM. Like there's no distributable ARM version of the life cycle. And in addition to like compiling lifecycle binaries for ARM, I think we would have to put some thought into if we want to validate these things in addition to stacks or roll them into the stack IDs. There's a little bit of thought to make sure you don't get a nonsensical build if you're switching between architectures. It was a candidate for the C&B roadmap for this year, but we had to do some hard prioritization and it got booted off. So that doesn't mean it won't get done this year because, you know, different contributors have their own priorities and it could still make it in, but it wasn't surfaced as a top shared priority for the project this year. And that's mostly because even folks running on, new M1 Max, which are feeling a lot of interest in ARM, like if you're using Docker Desktop, it can still build x86 images for you. So while it would be a nice to have, it's not a huge blocker for most people at the moment, but I think we should keep an eye and see if that changes.
I think more of the pressure will come when you start to see more and more like ARM architecture servers landing in like cloud infrastructure. When people start running like, ARM Kubernetes clusters, that's when this will probably be something that folks care about. And while I think you see some of that, it's definitely not the dominant form factor today.
I agree with that. Like we're definitely going to need to do this eventually. We may even want to do something fancier where you can, on x86 build for ARM, that kind of thing to enable more people's use cases, which is why we want to think about it carefully. But I think the journey to ARM for performance is going to happen, but I think it's going to happen slowly. Like I don't expect a lot of people to be running ARM Kubernetes clusters in the near future. We can reprioritize if we're proven wrong.
Cool. That was all helpful context. Thanks.
Any other thoughts about ARM before we move on? Okay, next up, language family shared libraries.
Yeah, so this was another thing that I was wondering about as I've just been working with folks on, especially the .NET Core re-architecture, where within the .NET language family, for example, there's a couple of places where you'd want to do something like parse a CS prod file, which is, basically anything that the .NET Buildpacks are going to build is going to have one of them. And we have right now some duplicate code between, for example, .NET Execute and .NET Publish Buildpacks that effectively do the same thing, like parse the prod file and discern some things about it. And I was wondering if there's like any historical reason why we don't currently have shared libraries of functionality for a given language family in a lot of our build packs. I saw that I think Java has some of those. Yeah, and I was just curious if there's some historical context that I'm missing on why there's such a difference there.
I can tell you why we did it on Java. It's because we have like 5 different build packs that install JREs and JDKs, different distributions, and they all do basically exactly the same thing. So it was a convenience to change that in one place. There are some cases like we also have a shared library for build systems like Gradle and Maven and SVT and Linogen that share some functionality. I feel like I've run into enough cases where something needs to change there in one build pack. I need to go change the library that I won't call that one as much of a success. Maybe it's a libjvm. Sometimes I wish that was just denormalized. Like I wouldn't mind a little bit of duplication there for the clarity. But the libjvm stuff has definitely been helpful to us on the Java build pack side.
I think historically why they didn't exist was it on like a lot of the other build packs is that there hasn't necessarily been huge amounts of overlap of like repeated code. In the cases where there were repeated bits of code, for the most part, they were like generalizable to like a language agnostic library like Packet or one of the sub libraries therein. I certainly think there are like maybe a handful of cases for these things. I just worry that it's going to be like a weird situation where you're like, cool, I have this shared library that literally consists of one type and one function. And it's like, at that point, what is like, is this really that beneficial? Or have you just dried things up at, for the sake of drying them up?
That's a fair point. One thing that I was considering on that, I guess maybe specifically for the .NET build packs is if someone wanted to subsequently contribute a build pack that did something in the .NET space, it's like quite plausible that it would need to do a couple of things that a few of the existing .NET build packs already do. So I was wondering, like, would shared libraries sometimes like provide a better jumping off point for future build pack contributions? I don't know if someone wanted to contribute another JVM, for example, like, does the shared library kind of help facilitate that in that case?
It does. I can't say we've like run into that situation in the wild yet. But hopefully someday Paketo will have enough users that someone will want some wonky JVM that we don't already support, and it would be easy. I'd say the one thing that's been useful as well is a little bit of functionality to parse a manifest file out of a jar. And there are a lot of cases where later build packs that are somehow decorating the build might want to reach into that information. So that's been another good use case. I will say that. Go ahead.
I think that like where I have seen overlap of things is like not technically the exact same code, but is like performing a similar process where it's like, okay, I'm going to parse a gem file, or I'm going to parse a project XML file or something. But like the build packs are looking for like different things inside those files. And I'm not necessarily sure like how beneficial it is to have a shared thing where like they ultimately are giving the build packs access to different things entirely. Like, I don't know, you maybe could say that that's like beneficial, but like in a lot of cases, I just am like, I really appreciate the fact that like every change I needed to add a feature to a build pack is just like in the build pack. And I didn't have to like change another repo, then like wait for that release and like bump it in this repo, and then like make some more modifications to the build pack to like string my feature through.
Yeah, some of our shared libraries can be annoying that way, especially the build system one. If I had it all to do over again, I feel like right now the way that the shared libraries are implemented is very confident that it knows exactly what you're going to want to do in your build pack. I feel like breaking it up into more modular functionality that's internally consistent rather than I know what a JVM build pack should do would make it more reusable when something needs to deviate from the mold a little bit. But I don't know all the use cases on the other side, so I can't say like whether, like I know it's helpful to us, but I don't know if it'd be helpful in other cases.
Feels like there's not a nice middle ground where we would like, and this is because everything's there in their own repository, where we would like be able to like just share code more easily in the family build pack and then like elevate it to a library that's more useful broadly. Like, but I don't know how to get around that besides like blowing everything up and saying, oh, mono repos or something like that. But maybe there's tooling that could help. Or like just say there's internal only in the top level stuff, and that's your shared library. And you could, I don't know, throw stuff in there. Like, or package or whatever you would call it. I guess.
I've sometimes wondered that if like, I don't think we have a lot of real world examples of people extending our language family groups with another build pack. But if they did, things like constants we use in the build plan and stuff like that are the kind of thing that it would be useful to pull in from a shared place. I don't know.
If you saw like a clear place in, for example, you said .NET, I'd be interested to see maybe like an example of what you had in mind, and we can kind of see like how well it fits across the different build packs and see like how useful it would actually be.
Yeah, that's cool. I, wasn't really trying to drive towards like any kind of decision, mostly just want to like gather some context here. I might play around with it and, see what changes come. This has been helpful.
No one wants to advocate for the mono repo.
I mean, I do. I like that better, but nobody else seems to. And there's like edge cases, like node goes in two things and so on. So
I feel like it's the nature of all software to like spread out into many repos and then come back into a mono repo forever and an accordion until the end of time.
sure. Yeah.
Because both ways of doing things are annoying, right?
It's fashion.
But we're also using anyway. I don't want to get into it. Sorry. We're using
Honestly,
Go.
on the build pack side, I would kind of love a mono repo. What stops me is the UX of the releases page.
Right.
Because we're still going to want to release each thing individually. And I feel like it makes it harder to find information about the release you're interested in when they're all in one thread.
This is why you have to go full Google tooling, unfortunately. Anyway.
Maybe one of these days GitHub will get back to making the releases section nicer. It's like already really hard to do things like have multiple minor branch release like segments. So like I'd love to see GitHub add features that make either managing multiple things through releases or managing multiple versions of things through releases better. But yeah, until that exists, it's like pretty hard. We have a bunch of automation that's like, grab the latest release from this repo. I don't even know how to like begin trying to solve that problem for a massive mono repo.
Yeah, we solve it with tag regexes when we're grabbing other people's releases and updating dependencies, but it's definitely not as clean as it could be if it was a first class concept, right? And it relies on people doing things in the same way consistently over time. All right, I think that's the end of the agenda. Sounds like there's no real resolution on the shared library stuff, Frankie, other than maybe we can get a concrete example next time if you're still interested in it.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I might just like do something if mostly I just wanted to understand if there were reasons that this wasn't already happening, which I think I've seen and gotten some context from you on reasons why it can be helpful. So that's good for now.
All right. I think that's all, folks. Have a good one.